Well, thank you everyone for coming to the McKenzie Hall Preservation Plan Open House. We really appreciate you taking the time to come and learn more about the project. We're excited to share with you today more about the project, and also wanted to thank everyone who participated in our engagement poster out in the lobby with the students today. So thank you for also attending that portion. And so we're just going to start with a few introductions. So this is our UO project management team that has been working on the project. Myself, I'm Liz Thorstensen. I am a planning associate in historic preservation in campus planning. I'm also the project manager on this project. And we have with us today also Emily Ang, the director of campus planning. And we have, I see one other project management team member in the audience. If you just want to give a wave, this is Daisy from architecture. Thank you so much for coming. And we have our two students with us today that have been working on the project as well. Phoenix and Wakadi, and he's our student historic preservation planning assistant in campus planning, and Ben Schmitz, same position as well, and they've been helping with research for this project. And then real quickly, we have a few members of our architect team here today from Architectural Resources Group, ARG. Maya Foti, Matt Davis, John Rush, and Kimberly Moreland are here today to present as well. And so this is a fun slide we wanted to include. So love it, hate it. Maybe we can't all agree. However, we can agree that McKenzie Hall is a very photogenic building. And our students, Ben and Phoenix, are going to come up and share a few fun McKenzie Hall facts with us.
Hi, I'm Phoenix and Walker.
And I'm Ben Schmitz. As you may have learned from our posters outside, McKenzie Hall used to be the law school, but today it mainly houses general classrooms, the history department, and the Yamada Language Center. And in the last year alone, 63 unique subjects were taught in these classrooms, and over 9,000 students individually were enrolled in these classes.
Yeah, nearly every undergraduate student will pass through McKenzie Hall's doors at some point in their university career. On any given day, about 4,000 students go through McKenzie Hall. And in addition to the students that take classes here, about 115 teaching and professional staff alongside graduate students occupy the space.
Thank you. All right, and so real quickly, we're going to go over our presentation agenda. So today we're going to be sharing the project background and why we're doing this project, our preservation plan basics, what are we doing, initial findings, what we have found out, and our next steps, what's left to do. So starting us off is Emily Ang, Director of Campus Planning, with the genesis of the project.
Thank you, Liz, and good evening, everybody. I'm Emily Ang, Director of the Office of Campus Planning. Our office is responsible for preserving the university's historic buildings. When the Conserving Black Modernism grant opportunity came up, we saw it as a chance to develop a preservation plan for a building that we really felt really deserved more recognition and study. We believed McKenzie Hall would be a strong candidate for the grant for a few key reasons. First, it was designed by DeNorval Unthank Jr., or D. Unthank as he was known. He was the first Black graduate of the University of Oregon School of Architecture, and later a prominent architect and partner at a time when that was rare. Second, McKenzie Hall stands out as a great example of modern architecture, specifically brutalist style in the Pacific Northwest. It also has high integrity, which means that it's in relatively good condition and hasn't had a lot of alterations. And we'll talk more about that later. And third, McKenzie Hall likely has significance at the local, regional, and national levels. This has been recognized in recent documentation prepared for the National Register of Historic Places. Both McKenzie Hall and DeNorval Unthank Jr. have an important story to tell. This grant helps us not only plan for the building's long-term care, but also highlight and celebrate an under-recognized history by building a deeper understanding of Unthank's impact on architecture and Black history.
Right, thank you, Emily. And moving along to our next slide, I'd like to share some more information about why this grant is important. So this grant, it supports efforts to document and preserve sites connected to African American history. Currently, fewer than 3% of the approximately 95,000 sites on the National Register represent African American cultural heritage. The National Trust for Historic Preservation's African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund focuses on expanding that representation. Since 2017, the Action Fund has raised about $200 million and supported more than 400 preservation projects nationwide. The Conserving Black Modernism program, a partnership between the Getty Foundation and the Action Fund, focuses on preserving modern architecture created by Black architects and designers and significant to Black history. McKenzie Hall's selection as part of the program's fourth cohort places the university within a national group of projects working to preserve this history. So a little bit more about the goals of the preservation plan and interpretation. So we're pulling together information on the work and influence of architect DeNorval Unthank Jr. We're also looking at how McKenzie Hall and Unthank's work fit within the Pacific Northwest modernism, including developing a more detailed biography than is typical for this type of plan. Another focus is identifying current building conditions to help guide maintenance and long-term preservation. We're sharing this work through interpretive materials and events such as today to build awareness on campus and in the community. And we're continuing to learn how McKenzie Hall's history connects to Black modernism, both locally and nationally. And a very brief overview of our schedule of the project timeline. Really, this project began in the beginning of 2025, where we were preparing the grant for submission. The grant was awarded in July of 2025. Fall 2025 was where we were working on the hiring of the architect consultant, ARG, and our student researchers. And then from winter 2025 through now, spring of 2026, we've been working on preservation plan research, development, and public engagement. Looking forward to summer and fall of 2026, we'll be looking into more of the interpretation plan development, which is also part of this project. And then we also look forward to another open house such as this in the fall, to be determined the date. But we're looking forward to celebrating the project completion and the interpretive element. And so now I will pass to our team, Matt from ARG. We'll be going into the preservation plan. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Liz. I'm Matthew Davis, principal with Architectural Resources Group. And before we dive into some of the interesting information we've been collecting about the building and Unthank, I just wanted to take a step back and say a few words in general about what goes into a historic preservation plan. In a way, you can think of a preservation plan as a manual for the building. It's a manual that consolidates all in one place a summary of the building's history, a robust analysis of the building's significance, whether it be historical or architectural, or as in this case, both, and also pulls together information regarding the building's current conditions and some recommended treatments for ways to address those conditions. Maya will talk a little bit more about that component of the plan in a second. So not surprisingly, no big surprises here in terms of the typical contents of a preservation plan, but I just wanted to say a little bit more about a couple of these. So when we were writing a historical context, part 4 there, some of the questions we're looking to answer and are seeking to answer and will be answering for Unthank Hall include, what led to the building's construction and who was involved? How did it come to be? Why does it look like it looks? How has the building been used over time? What alterations have been made to the building since its construction? And what larger historical or architectural trends are important to understanding the building's significance? And then on the topic of significance, one thing to keep in mind, I know this is old hat for many of you in the room, but just want to underscore it because it's especially relevant to this building. There are multiple avenues of significance. According to the National Register Guidelines, a building or property can be significant for its association with events or patterns of events, or it can be associated with significant persons or with, significant design trends. And so there are several avenues of significance that we will be evaluating in that portion of the report. That's enough of the general overview. With that, we're gonna dive into some of the specifics pertaining to this building and de-unthink. So I'll hand this off to Kim.
Thank you, Matt. I'm going to talk about the kid who would grow up to design this building. De Novo de Unthank was a respected, humble craftsman who spent almost 5 decades as a professional architect. His contributions to his community and industry was deep and wide. Although he based his practice in Eugene, his work shaped the face of architect at several levels, the state, national, and global levels. Before he became a respected and revered architect, he grew up as the son of the beloved De Novo and Thelma Shipman Unthank. Who committed their lives to improving race relations and advocating for justice. And this dedication would be evident in the lives of the eldest son, De Novo Unthank Jr., and his 4 siblings, Tom, James, Thelma, and Leslie. He came to Portland, Oregon from Kansas City with his parents, Dr. De Novo Unthank and Thelma, in 1929. Just 3 years earlier, 62.5% of the Oregon voters repealed the Black exclusion laws that was adopted when Oregon became a state in 1959. The repealed laws stated no free Negroes or mulattoes could come and reside in, own property, make contracts, or sue within the state, and it ordered officials to remove and punish anyone who did so. Although the laws were repealed in 1926, the anti-Black culture and customs were still present. And upon their arrival in 1931, the couple experienced tremendous trauma trying to relocate to an all-white neighborhood in Southeast. And Mrs. Unthank was unjustly put on trial for protecting his family. His family devoted much of their energy to improving race relations in Portland, leveraging their positions as trusted leaders to eradicate discriminatory practice, create joyous moments, and elevate the Portland Black family. So De Novo Unthank Jr. grew up during some very dynamic times in United States history, watching his parents actively engage with these issues of the time. He was born at the beginning of Depression, 10 years old when the Depression ended, and a teenager when World War II began, and a graduate from Franklin High School at the end of the war. And so this would shape and frame his young experience. And as mentioned earlier, De Novo Unthank Jr. attended Franklin High School. He played football, he served as a student leader, and in 1946, he was elected the boy representative on the student council and represented the school on the Intercity Junior Red Cross Council. Unthank would graduate from Franklin High School at the age of 16 in 1946. A little glimpse of his social life, according to the 1944 Portland Inquirer, the social life section reads, last weekend, 4 daring young men, Chuck Cragg, William Hillard, John Minor, and DeNorval Unthank, spent a very short vacation on the shores of the mighty Pacific. The weather was cool, but they still enjoyed themselves very much. And like DeNorval Unthank Jr., his swimming companions will become accomplished young adults. For example, William Hillard will become the first Black person to work in the Oregonian newsroom, and become the first Black editor of the Oregonian. As a youth, Unthank was a member of the YMCA, and he loved the Y Camp. And he would later become very involved in the Y Camp. The Unthank family was faithful members of the historic St. Philip Episcopal Church, one of the Portland's Portland's 5 early Black churches. And as a young budding architect, he designed the pews for the newly built St. Philip's Church, and he was commissioned to design and build the private residence of Father Stone, who was one of Portland's first Black Episcopal priests and one of the founders of the Urban League. He is, in my research and talking to his daughter, Libby Thrower, he was really a quiet giant, dedicated to excellence and scholarship. After graduating from Franklin High School, he attended his father's alma mater, Howard University, in pursuit of a medical degree. After 2 years, he returned to Oregon and transferred to the University of Oregon, where he majored in architect. And 1951 was a very eventful year for DeNorval. He became a chartered member of the Beta Psi chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha, the same fraternity his father had pledged at the University of Kansas in the early 1920s. And his father would be part of the reception, welcome him as a new member of Alpha Phi Alpha. He met his wife, Doris Debbie Burgess, at the University of Oregon in 1951, a young white student and a member of the Gamma Phi Beta sorority. And in opposition to the interracial datings, some men burned a cross on the sorority line, and she was pressured to leave. But that did not deter them. After he graduated from the School of Architect, he and Burgess married on July 7th, 1951. And their marriage received so much attention that the Life magazine wanted to do a piece on them. The couple divorced 21 years later, and he was later married to Jill Cogan. In 1952, he became the first African American to earn a bachelor's degree in architecture from the University of Oregon. His commitment to the community was evident in his lectures to his peers and in his participation in community actions. In 1965, he addressed his peers in a presentation titled Community Considerations. In 1968, Willie Means, some of you might know, a Eugene civic leader, shared, shortly after Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, several leading white Eugene businessmen contacted Dee wanting to do something in the way of Black employment and in the memories of Martin Luther King Jr. Dee contacted Willie Means and head of the federal funded anti-poverty program, and with 2 board members, Sam Reynolds and Dr. Lawrence Carter, they developed a grassroots program that employed the first 35 African Americans in Eugene Springfield private sector. It has been said that De Norville never forgot his Portland heritage, and he advocated for low-income housing and assisted living for minorities. He joined forces with community leaders and the Urban League of Portland to develop albino housing projects. As a young architect, he designed the pews of the newly built St. Philip's Church, and as I mentioned later, and was commissioned to design and build the private residence. In 1980, he designed a renovation of the historic Interstate Fire Station into the Interstate Firehouse Cultural Center. He also participated in the renovation of Mount Olive Baptist Church and the King Neighborhood Facility, which was a Model Cities project. Growing up in Portland during such a dynamic period of history must have influenced his architectural styles and more. Many who knew him said that his approach was to confront racism through excellence of his work and scholarship. He wasn't out front. Um, um, he didn't really work, out front in the public, but behind the scenes. He did not let his race define him. And in 1980, he was inducted into the College of Fellow, AIA highest honor. And in a Portland Observer article recognizing his achievement, he shared that he was fortunate to have had wide and various experiences with the types and kinds of projects, small and large, in various locations around the state. And he went on to say, one of the satisfaction that I derive from architectural practice is the experience of working with people to help find solutions in their environmental and spatial problems. And thank you.
Thanks, Kim. And as was mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, my name is John Rush. I'm an architectural historian at ARG, and I'm going to mention a bit more about the history of the building that we are all sitting in right now. So you heard a little bit about McKenzie Hall a tad bit earlier. So when it was constructed, it originally served as the home of U of O's law school. And it served in that purpose between the early 1970s and the late 1990s. So by the mid-1960s, the university was anticipating enrolling a larger student body in the law school, which was then housed in Fenton Hall, and began the process of planning a new facility that could accommodate more students, a larger library, a moot courtroom, and larger classrooms. The dean of the law school at that time, Hans Lindy, hired De Norville Unthank Jr., who was then at the Eugene architectural firm Williamson Endicott and Unthank. After completing the working drawings for that firm, Unthank established a new office with partners Grant Cedar and Anna Potisha, which was then responsible for completing the construction documents for the building and overseeing construction administration. The building was dedicated in 1971. The Law Center served its original purpose for almost 30 years before U of O constructed a new facility for the law school on East Campus in the late 1990s. By this time, the building had been renamed Grayson Hall for a donor, although it was renamed McKenzie Hall several years later. With the relocation of the law school, McKenzie was renovated for the College of Arts and Sciences, which involved a number of alterations, such as constructing new walls throughout the former law library spaces at the north end of the building. I also want to spend a few slides to talk about the architecture of the building and its significance. I think a lot of you are probably familiar with the term brutalism as an architectural style for this type of monumental modernist building, and you likely have a strong opinion about it. Either you can't get enough of it, or maybe you think it's intimidating, confrontational, maybe just plain ugly. It's okay if you do think that. Brutalism is obviously very polarizing, yet regardless of where you stand, I think we can all agree that it's not boring. Those of us on the project team, I think, we like to think that almost anyone can gain a better appreciation of brutalism by taking a closer look and exploring the different patterns, textures, contrasts, and sheer variety that McKenzie Hall offers. The building is full of surprises, and we hope fun surprises if you approach it with the right eyes. Let's take a moment to understand where brutalism has come from. So an architectural history crash course in probably a minute. At the very broadest level, pioneering designers in Europe during the early 20th century revolutionized Western architecture with the movement that we know as modernism. They stripped buildings of decorative ornament and focused on their most essential compositions of volume and space. So architects of the generation of Le Corbusier and Walter Gropius, to name just a couple examples, shook off the trappings of classical architecture and instead focused on abstract geometries with precise proportions. You can see a couple of examples in the top of this slide. They also wished to express materials honestly and structure honestly. Advances in construction technology helped achieve a machine age aesthetic, like the large expanse of glass at the Bauhaus here. The weightless and pure qualities of early modernism experienced some shifts after the end of World War II. An important example of this development was Le Corbusier's Le Site Radius, which is in the lower left, for which the architect left poured and cast concrete exposed, a material that's known in French as béton brut, or raw concrete. So brutalism. The building had some of the same qualities of earlier modernism, but was clearly heavier, more solid, and more present. This new approach to modernism gained popularity in the 60s and 70s for a variety of reasons, not least of which was its comparatively affordable and durable qualities. During this period, architects around the world were becoming restless with that established vocabulary of modernism, and they were eager to experiment. And so we have examples like Boston City Hall, which really just shows how far architects were pushing that vocabulary to a really exaggerated scale. So how does McKenzie Hall fit into this tradition of brutalism, and what do we want to make sure that we capture in the preservation plan? So I'm going to walk through a couple of its characteristic elements. At a high level, McKenzie Hall is characterized by its monumental scale and its sprawling plan, which is formed by several different building components that originally served specific functions for the law school. You have the classrooms and administrative offices at the south end of the building, connected by the central corridor to the four-story wing at the north end of the building, which contained the original law library. The materials in McKenzie Hall express solidity, particularly the exposed concrete and brick that are dominant throughout the building. Even where those materials are used in abundance, there is a variety in the textures when you look up close, like the imprint of the wood formwork on concrete, or the different coursing patterns in bricks, or the gradated colors of tiles in the corridor. These more heavy-duty materials are complemented by wood accents, which you can see throughout the building in the suspended slat ceilings, handrails, baseboards, and wood panels that are integrated into aluminum window systems. Although McKenzie Hall is large in scale, it is not a monolith. It is broken up by repeated elements that create different visual patterns across its exterior facades and major interior spaces. These patterns include rows of piers that separate the windows along the corridor and the faculty offices, the projections at the north end of the building, which originally contained study carrels in the library, and surprising patterns of openings like the vertical windows arranged around a large raised balcony at the east side of the building. And then finally, there is also something to be said for the building's use over time, which has supported generations of U of O students, faculty, and staff coming together. These types of intangible aspects of place are not always addressed in preservation plans because safeguarding these qualities may require different types of strategies than the methods used to repair or restore important physical features. However, we think it's important to recognize that McKenzie Hall has been the setting of teaching, academic research, and interaction among members of the university community for as long as the building has been standing. The design and physical features of the building certainly support these activities, like the small nooks in the main corridor that allow for one-on-one conversations or quiet study, or the larger gathering spaces like the galleries and exterior courtyards and plazas. As we heard at the beginning of the presentation tonight, McKenzie Hall has served countless students over the years, and its careful preservation will allow it to remain part of the U of O experience well into the future. So with that, I'll hand it over to my colleague, Maya.
Thank you, John. Hi, my name is Maya Foti. I'm an architect, a principal with Architectural Resources Group, And I spearhead the effort to perform the condition assessment, which was one of the requirements of the preservation plan. And the intent of the conditions assessment is very high level. So we're just looking at envelope and interior character defining features. So basically components of the building that were made up of the original building versus things that were added later, like carpeting and stuff like that. And we didn't so this was not a comprehensive conditions assessment to understand this structural integrity, bringing it up to code, or mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. It was purely just the materials. The building is actually in very good condition. The things that we did find essentially on the exterior were, some deteriorated concrete at the steps. You'll see most of the conditions issues happen where there's a lot of use at the front entry, a lot of biological growth, which is definitely not atypical for the Pacific Northwest. The wood paneling, that was definitely, that you can see throughout the building, the recessed elements around the windows, handrails, that's also very typical. That would have more wear than the masonry components. And then you'll see on the lower, I guess, looking left-hand corner, right-hand corner, just a general soiling of the masonry. Looking at the building, well, you'll see a picture later. You don't notice it so much, but it just makes the building look a little bit run down. You'll see an uneven patina to the building that wouldn't be there if it were cleaner. And on the interior, you could see this right outside. Actually, that was just a mechanical duct that had a paneling on it that's starting to peel. You may not notice it out of the corner of your eye when you look at directly. You're like, oh, that's falling down. Some leaking skylights. One of the other things that's quite noticeable, this is on the upper floors where those wood slats are missing, and so all you're really looking at is insulation, dinged up wood doors. Again, something you may not notice out of the corner of your eye, but it might kind of make the building feel a little bit more run down than it is actually. And then finally, the last thing, that's the kind of the fun part of what we do, is trying to understand, what's original material and what was added on later. I call them accretions, and I don't have a little pointer, but for example, starting from the top of the building, you'll see that kind of very heavy flashing at the parapet. On the lower right hand, you could see that the intent was for the parapet to hit the sky was just a very gentle line instead of this big fat flashing, which was just done probably because it's better waterproofing than the thin flashing. I don't know. It also covers that concrete band at the top. Other little things, for example, the big metal handrail that was added in the middle, we need to meet code, but it's kind of this big, bulky blue thing. And then we need accessibility. You have that ramp to the right. But if you look on the lower right-hand corner, it used to be this beautiful, pristine sort of sculpture in the landscape. You don't have the trees in front of it yet. And it really did seem like the sculptural object in the historic pictures. Of course, the black and white kind of helps emphasize those angles. And now it just seems a little bit drab and run down. So hopefully as care moves on for these buildings, these elements will be picked up and kind of start taking it back to that original sculptural appearance. And that's it for conditions.
Thank you, Maya. All right, so thank you, everyone. Thank you all, to all of our speakers today from ARG and UO. And just to recap here, our next steps, just a quick recap, the schedule. So looking ahead, summer and fall of 2026, we'll be starting to look at interpretation plan development, and then looking forward to our next open house in fall of 2026. To share the findings of the preservation plan once it's completed and celebrate the interpretive display element. Follow us online. We have set up a McKenzie Hall Preservation Plan webpage. There's our UO Campus Planning webpage. And then a link, if anyone's interested, to the National Trust for Historic Preservation Conserving Black Modernism Grants. Again, and I wanted to also say a special thank you to Auto Patisha, as Kimberly mentioned, was thanks for our business partner and has been consulting with us for this project. All right, and thank you, everyone. And we'd like to open it up to questions and discussion. And if you have a question, I can come out to you with the microphone and we can do that way. Does anybody have any questions or feedback that they'd like to offer? All right. All right. Well, we'll give it a minute. Anyone on the panel that had anything else they'd like to share? We have a few extra minutes. See, yeah, sure. Yeah.
Matt pointed out, in addition to identifying the conditions, we're also providing treatment recommendations. And I also forgot that we had Phoenix and Ben, who also help with the condition assessment. So architecture students from the university. And so as part of this effort, it was fun to include students and kind of walk them through our process of how we would do a conditions assessment. And they took on a component of it, which we haven't seen yet, but we'll get it soon, right?
Yes, we have this, the students will be with us through the end of spring term, so we still have time. So, uh, and yes, thank you to the students who also prepared the posters out in the hallway today that you saw as part of the open house. And I'm going to walk over here. I think we had a question in the back, and then I'll get to you, Hal. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, yes, my question was related to how the preservation plan is going to fit into longer term university planning, master planning related to the use of the building, and is that being considered independently of the preservation plan or in tandem with? I guess how's that all kind of fit together?
Yeah, let's see. Emily, do you want to take that one or? Okay, I'm going to bring the mic to you because we have one microphone.
Yeah, so the preservation plan, it's going to be a guiding document for any work that, is happening in this building. And so there's not really a known, renovation project just yet, but we know that over time, there'll need to be maintenance, repair of deferred maintenance, and there may be, new occupants or just a change in need that would, that would create the need for a project. And so that's really how we're seeing it, is that this is a resource for us to really, thoughtfully care for the building over time. And then because of the grant, it just allowed this opportunity to develop this body of knowledge along with it. And so there's like the technical component and the educational component.
Right, I'm walking back over here to Hal.
You might have answered my question, but I was wondering what the next steps were as far as understanding what is required and how much work it is to remediate the conditions you identified. I'm also curious about, let's see, I may have my directions mixed up, but the north facade that didn't used to have the ramp and that now has the ramp, if you have recommendations about how to improve the appearance there, obviously not including getting rid of the ramp, which isn't really an option.
So I guess the intent of the conditions assessment, like I said, is super high level. And it's more to set the stage for, these would be the general recommendations, and also specifically how to treat historic fabrics. So we might say, you would want to do a pressure wash, certain pressure, heat, biocides for biological growth. And so just to be very clear that to make sure that whatever project happens in the future, whatever that might be, that we kind of capture an umbrella of appropriate treatment methods. As far as the, for example, the ramp and other cool things that we found, like the lighting at the corridors, there used to be like a wall wash versus these heavy light fixtures down the center of it. So I think we would identify it and we would just say, give a recommendation. The ramp is a tough one. You always want to bring people in the main door, but how do you put in a ramp? We might give high-level recommendations. We haven't really talked about that. Same for the other cool thing upstairs was that they had those little study cubbies. And historically, it was the big open floor plate. And then it was meant, and they were open. I don't think they had doors, right? They were meant to be open. Yeah. And so how do you keep a character defining feature like that? So high level recommendations, and something like the ramp, I mean, you saw that it does detract, you know, is there any way to tuck that in a way that it's more embedded into the actual, you know, you go up the steps, maybe it becomes, I don't know, maybe it becomes more of a landscape feature. Maybe you could berm up the landscape somehow in the back so you don't have this big heavy handrail. So we might just make high level recommendations like that, but that in itself would be a really fun design problem, and just say, you know, design the ramp so that it gets people to the front entrance, but it's really, you don't actually notice it. Have fun. Did I answer your question? Okay, great.
All right, I'll get to this one and then I'll get over here.
You know, one thing I find interesting about the building is like related to that open corridor on the roof. Is that the architects originally designed the building for additional floors to be put on top. And it just leads to the question of like, you know, I think, you know, as an architect, Unthink was involved in a lot of adaptive reuse projects. And I would think that this building over time needed more floors or needed to change. So that like, it might be seen as a perfectly valid and important way to keep a building moving into the future is to change it. Does this plan see, does the way that this study frames the building leave open the possibility of potentially dramatic change? Or is it about the building kind of being frozen in time?
Yeah, I mean, I might pass to our architects, but I think our, you know, this plan does not, well, the grant funding is not for anything beyond the documentation of the building and the architect. So I can't speak to like a future project, but if that's a possibility, I'll pass to one of our architects if they would like to take that on, thinking high level.
I mean, Maya was just now looking at me like, so,
Opinions, but go
okay.
ahead.
Well, I think I just want to preface this by saying that as a firm, I don't think that we typically believe in freezing properties in amber. I mean, you can't have preservation if you don't have the future. And fundamentally, I think that we agree with that. And we have to, frankly, the condition of the upper level is a challenge. I don't quite know how we're going to address that yet with the recommendation. I mean, I think it's certainly possible to design an upper, no, to design an upper story addition that is completely, okay, yeah. That's compliant with the Secretary of the Interior standards, which is a set of National Park Service derived guidance that we follow as kind of professionally industry standards for sensitive preservation projects. And they always, the standards for rehabilitation always do leave open the option of some, expansions, additions. There are ways to design that type of addition sensitively so that it doesn't detract. You can still tell the original design, the original massing from the addition. So I think that's certainly possible to do. Whether or not there's an appetite at the university level, that would be for our U of O colleagues to speak to. I'm hoping I'm answering the question, but.
Yeah. I was just going to add so I was on the Historic Landmark Commission for 8 years in Portland. And so we got a lot of projects where you'd have a building that was on the National Register and they wanted to do an addition on it, or it was a historic district and it was, a new building in historic district. And how do you do that? And most importantly, and part of what we're setting the stage for is, again, what are the character defining features of this building, right? And I think we'll be able to spell that out in the report. And then the whole idea is that I think good design would be able to, develop the building further without destroying the character defining feature. I mean, that's the challenge. And absolutely you can do that. And there's some incredible additions and modifications to historic building where you look at it and it's complementary and it all comes, but you really need to understand, again, very clearly in black and white, what are the character defining features of the building? It's the concrete, it's the massing, it's the irregular, pattern of the, the floor plan. So there's definitely, I mean, that's kind of an art to it and it's a whole field, which is super interesting. And I think it's very exciting, that juxtaposition of how do you do new within existing? Doing it badly is so easy. Yeah.
Yeah, from a campus planning perspective, I don't think our intention would be to freeze the building in time. Like I was saying, the plan is a guiding document to help us, you know, to help us if we do have to make alterations or repairs, just do it in a way that's sensitive to the history. And even this room that we're sitting in is an example of, a modern use of this building. This is an active classroom, which is that's what the modern pedagogy is about. So this was improving this room was an opportunity to do that. And so, yeah, so I see more of, I don't know, I don't really know of any plans currently, to change anything in the building, but the thing about university buildings are that they're here for a long time, and so uses and occupants will always change.
We had one more question. We still have a question? Okay. Just hold it under your chin.
Under my chin. Okay. Alice Parman, community member. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about the interpretation? I know you're going to be working on that, but any thoughts about it?
Yeah, I'll come back over here by Emily. I know that's a project that's still in the works, and we're going to be working with our partners in the Museum of Natural and Cultural History to help us determine that. So that hasn't been developed yet, but we're about to embark on that. Emily, did you want to add anything?
Sure, we're going to let the content developed by this plan, I think, be the driver of, whatever it is. So it'll be the content for whatever the interpretation element is. But right now we have a budget, and then we also have a lot of ideas, and we've done outreach and, spoken with partners to brainstorm. But anyone here is free also to give us their ideas for what that could be. So after the plan is complete, we will then start a process engaging with probably a group of people and more to determine, what would be a good interpretive aspect what would be a good interpretive display that's, educational and that will keep this information that will build on this information. And so there are ideas that, it could be at this building, it could not be at the building, it could be something physical, or it could be digital, it could be art. So we're open right now. And yeah, what I know is that it will draw on the content from the plan.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you for all of your questions. It's been wonderful. All right. Well, I will wrap things up then and thank everybody for attending this evening. We really appreciate you coming, and reminder that there is a sign-in sheet. If you'd like to continue to be in contact with us about the project, please add your name and email to the sheet, and we'll be sure to add you to our project list. We have a few more minutes. Please feel free to enjoy the refreshments. Thanks, everyone.